They don't interfere with one another, so they should be fine. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us at the NED. I am Joanna Rzinska, and I'm the Senior Program Officer for Europe, which in our case also includes Ukraine, clearly one of the most important states in our portfolio, and I would say an interesting case study for many things around the world at this point. Few things are harder than a revolutionary hangover. While the excitement and exhilaration last for some time, the enormity of the tasks reinstating order while setting right all the wrongs in the past are objectively daunting. Perhaps the greatest challenge is managing expectations. As we've seen time and again, change is not only hard, it is often tedious and slow. Transitions stretch decades, and maintaining public engagement, which is key to a successful transition, can be difficult. For civil society, which has been the driver of reforms in Ukraine, finding a balance between cooperation, co-optation, and collusion is becoming an increasing issue. Ukraine, in 2013, got a rare opportunity for a do-over, I would say for the third time. And in contrast to the Orange Revolution of 2004, society came off the Maidan with what appeared an unbendable determination to roll up its sleeves and finally move the stalled state to stability and prosperity. Ukraine has a chance to write its own history, or write its own future rather, and draw a new roadmap. In terms of independent statehood, Ukraine is barely a toddler. Yet its administration and government are heavily burdened not only by its communist past, but by decades of poor governance and deeply corrupt social ties. One cannot underestimate the enormous challenge that reform of almost every sector of a large, populous, economically and socially diverse country presents. The task of approaching this Gordian knot is clearly not made easier by the ongoing war in the East and occupation of Crimea, both of which individually would be taxing for the most stable and prosperous country. The purpose of today's discussion is not to diminish the achievements of the current government in any way. While a number of crucial reforms have been moving forward in earnest, most agree that Ukraine has not reached the tipping point where all the post-Maidan achievements are irreversible. A sober assessment of the status quo, including risks, challenges, and opportunities, we believe assists those dedicated to supporting Ukraine's continued progress. Today's speakers have been intimately involved in everything from the outset of the protests in November 2013. Mr. Taras Shevchenko, to my left, is founder and executive director of the Center of Democracy and Rule of Law, a Kiev-based organization that focuses on civil society development, independent media, and fighting corruption. In 2016-17, he was board co-chair of the Reanimation package of reforms, a coalition of Ukrainian NGOs that developed and advocate for reform implementation. Mr. Shevchenko is currently in the US as a World Fellow at Yale University and holds a Master's in Law and Master's of Economics from Kiev National University. To my right, Ms. Daria Kaleniuk is Executive Director of the Anticorruption Action Center, which she co-founded in 2012. She's also a specialist on asset recovery and anti-money laundering initiatives. Her work has attracted international media attention, including features in the New York Times, Economist, and on NPR. In 2010-11, she was a Fulbright Scholar at Chicago Kent College of Law, where she earned a master's degree in financial law services. So I wanted to have this as a bit more of a conversation rather than a lecture. Most of you are quite familiar with what has been happening in Ukraine, so we're not going to go from very basics, but we're going to take a little bit of a chronological approach to what has happened, what is happening, and look a little bit to the future on what should happen. And I'm going to start with Daria to talk a little bit about the anti-corruption initiatives.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's my pleasure to be here and finally to present some achievements. As I was told by Joanna, we have to start from the positive. It's not easy, but there are some achievements. And in the field of anti-corruption, if you compare with the previous 25 years of independence of Ukraine, there are enormous achievements. So what precisely I think are achievements of Ukraine in anti-corruption? First of all, we have the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, the first truly independent from political influence law enforcement agency. For 2 decades and a half, Ukrainian law enforcement agencies were captured. They were controlled, and still most of them, except this new Anti-Corruption Bureau agency, are controlled by senior politicians, president, majority in the parliament, and used to cover grand corruption. So we believe in our organization that the prerequisite for grand corruption is a feel of impunity, is always an opportunity for kleptocrats, for oligarchs, for corrupt businessmen, and corrupt judges and corrupt prosecutors to simply avoid liability. So they feel that they can always resolve the case. They can steal from the state, they can embezzle state funds, natural resources, but they will be not punished, never. It's just the matter how much they have to pay to resolve the case, and how close they have to know senior politicians. But now the things are changing, and this system is shaking. The system of vicious circle of corruption is shaking. Now we have the new Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, which are triggering cases against untouchable people in Ukraine. And the most recent case is about two days ago, National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine detained the Deputy Minister of Defense for stealing at the procurement and on fuel for the soldiers. So stealing during the war on the defense, I believe it's more than a crime, and it's more than corruption. It's the matter of the security and of the survival of Ukraine. And we would not have known that without the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. And we would not have had a hope, actually, to punish those who allow themselves to steal during the war from the soldiers. Whether the punishment will be, whether the person will go to jail, whether the stolen assets will be confiscated, it's still not a precise answer to that. Because while we have the new law enforcement agencies ready to go and collect evidence and pack this evidence and bring to court, we still don't have judges, and we don't have court where these cases have to be and could be resolved in a positive way and quickly and in a fair trial. We'll talk about that later. What's the second achievement? Ukraine is a champion in the transparency. And I probably will not be saying too many compliments to Ukraine, saying that Ukraine is probably the most transparent country in the world, in Europe for sure. So since the revolution of dignity, we've managed to open public procurements, access to information how public procurements are being conducted in Ukraine. So Ukrainian public procurements in the measure of transparency are receiving the best world awards. It's ProZorro system. There are problems there still in other fields, but in transparency, it's the most transparent probably in the world procurement system. We have electronic asset declarations of public officials. Enormous wealth was disclosed a year ago by public officials in Ukraine. Judges, prosecutors, ministers, parliamentarians, they first time in their lifetime, they declared what they own, more or less what they own. I think many of them lied, honestly. But before that, we didn't know that they collect collections of wines, that they have churches, that they have jewelry worth of $10,000 and more. We didn't know that the president of Ukraine has precisely 100 and something companies where he is a beneficial owner. It's an opening. And we didn't know how much hard cash they have. So as the declarations revealed that public officials, they simply have under the mattress somewhere $1 million, 500,000 euro, not hryvnias. They don't. Then they put hard cash in hryvnias. They trust more to the foreign currency. And the one case investigated by NABU of a corrupt judge showed that it's not only storing under the mattress. Under the mattress, they store probably that wealth which is not illicit, but they conserve that into the cans and put it under in their gardens. And this is how Ukrainian judges they collect their wealth, which is sometimes and merely usually are the process of corruption. So transparency and the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, the law enforcement agency, which is ready to go against untouchable people. Two major achievements. And still, this is already a lot, but not enough. Change is not irreversible. Transparency, access to information, and existence of NABU provided first the big demand, even larger demand of the society for government to fight corruption and to deliver. Transparency didn't contribute a lot to the corruption perception index. It probably made our score worse because people know more about corruption. It doesn't mean Ukraine is more corrupt than under Yanukovych. People simply know more. And they actually expect more, which is good. The expectations are raised dramatically. Corruption is #1 problem for the citizens of Ukraine. So the next stage is for the government to reply. And I will stop here.
So if you could say a couple of words about the reanimation package of reforms, about the coalition, because it ends up being held up as kind of the gold standard of civil society cooperation coalition, and also as a platform for constructive interaction with the government, right, and pushing forward the demands of civil society, right, as the main representative body of civil society in Ukraine. So if you could say a few words about the genesis of it.
Of course. Thank you a lot for inviting me to speak here. It's a big honor. The Reanimation Package of Reform, the coalition that now unites 82 non-governmental organizations, that's, I consider, one of the very good example of civil society working jointly for one goal, reform of the country, and demonstrating stability during 3.5 years, while other institutions are not demonstrating their stability in their work. Like, for example, politicians, coalition in parliament that fell like 1 year after it was created. So just very briefly to say about idea of the coalition. During Maidan, leaders of civil society start thinking in positive way. Revolutions and big gathering of people, they are mostly about something negative. Against corruption, against Yanukovych, against impunity, against. What for we are staying? What is our agenda? And that's how active part of Maidan, start thinking about roadmap of reforms. The roadmap of reforms that now we are using, that's for 2016-2017. That's like more developed plan with parameters on 22 different areas, with NGOs, lead experts, 350 actors who work in different directions. It's available online on our website. The first presentation was March 7, 2014, with 8 priority areas. We, of course, we're not thinking of it like ideal, exceptional. I think citizens who work within the coalition, they do what they have to do. They invest the time, efforts, energy to look for solutions and changes that are possible to bring. The coalition was successful because think tanks like ANTAC, like Center for Democracy, like others, when there was no window of opportunity, they were preparing initiatives. And there were a lot of different drafts that were pending before Parliament, like, for example, law amending 53 legislation acts in order to make Ukraine more transparent. Because when access to public information law was adopted 2011, it had to be brought in line with other legislation, and that was blocked by Yanukovych parliament. And just one vote was needed, and that was easily done with extra pressure from civil society. The same with law on public stereo broadcasting, the same with law on education, the same with other legislation acts. What we now working on, that's a challenge to have a broader coalition around Ukraine and having linkage with people who are in cities, in villages, because our coalition was mostly like Kyiv-based and doing advocacy in the central level. We are now trying to develop coalitions in oblast, on the regional level, and to work there as well. About successes, generally, I consider that there are a lot of areas that are changing a lot, but at the same time, because of very high expectations, and first of all, because people are becoming poor, not richer, they not that much worry about that we are less independent from Russia or that smaller corruption in energy sphere when they have personally pay like 2 or 3 times bigger accounts for the gas. And without economical development, people will not be happy with reforms. Even if these reforms would be evaluated in a high way, they won't be happy without economical development and without feeling of justice. There is no feeling of justice because no one is in jail, because they hear about corruption every day. And that's important. Ukraine in ranks of the United Nations about happiness of nations is the least happy nation in Europe and one of the least happy nation in the world. It used to be before Maidan. It's even more now. And when we speak about rates like perception corruption, perception of freedom of speech, I believe Ukraine is lower than in reality because of absolutely non-happiness of people. A lot of Ukrainians think black and white. Actually, I think a lot of Americans think black and white as well. And what is bad about black and white? It's not only that it's like only 2 things. Like people were always like after legislation passed asking, so was it zrada чи перемога? Was it failure or success? I remember when I was a kid, it was still Soviet Union, and I was coming, my parents were viewing television, I was asked, tell me where is Nazi and where is ours? Because the movie about Soviet Union time, like word was always about Germans and like Soviet, where is Nazi and where is Germans? But what is bad about black and white? That you not just split halves. Unless it's really white, you call it always black. So you don't see these shades. You don't evaluate that it's positive unless it's like really like excellent. So I think I'll stop here, but I'll tell about what I think about tipping point issue in my second part.
And I'm going to stay with you to actually kind of, as you segue more naturally into the next section of it in terms of what some of the bigger challenges ahead are, not only in terms of the RPR, but also in terms of moving reforms forward and this kind of delicate balance of public perception and public support for reforms, right? And I mean, if we're looking ahead, maybe I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but I mean, there are elections that are coming in and you can see some of the games that are already being played now. So if you could just kind of continue your line of thought.
Okay. So as to challenges, I think one of the most important challenge currently in Ukraine is building and rebuilding institutions. In those areas where we had new institutions built, many of them are very successful, like NABU that Daria mentioned. It was newly built institution, and it was done in really proper way with proper people being on a selection committee. Same with traffic police. Enormous difference in what was 3 years ago or 4 years ago, when I wouldn't believe there is a single traffic police officer who is not taking bribes. Would never believe in that. Now I haven't heard about single case that's my friends would know that they were given or taken bribe to a police officer in Kiev. That's very huge difference. And that was because new institution was built. Because we cannot like rebuild or reestablish, close and open every institution. At the same time, changing practice how ministries are operating, how public service is organized, thinks about policy cycles and making public policy. Unfortunately, there is bad thing with translation because policy is translated as politics, and that's mislead everyone. They, when they hear about making politics, they just, oh no, we don't interested in politics. We don't want to listen to that. But the thing that is now happening in Ukraine is trying to change the governments with ministries, change institution level, establish institutions like public service broadcaster and others. I believe that is of the crucial importance. After Orange Revolution, we had like democratization because of more democratic behavior or governments for a certain time. It became absolutely not stable because nothing on institutional level changed. And when new people came, they just immediately introduced different practice. Strong institutions not allowing new government, new president that is elected, they're still blocking him from changing everything. And it was work for Ukraine and for America, I believe, as well. So institutions are essential. Tipping point. I don't believe in tipping point idea. We will never know when we pass this tipping point. Did Poland pass tipping point with democratic reform? I think probably we would tell yes 5 years ago, and probably no now. You cannot really be sure that changes are not reversible. Everything is reversible. And when we presume that it is not reversible, or like we pass this moment, we actually lose our attention. And we will think that we don't need to care about something that is still very important. So I don't really think that the tipping point idea is so much crucial. We just need to make changes, and we need to make institutional changes first of all. And we need to have people live better lives and think about justice. Just one example to tell about like institutional changes, and it's also about issue of corruption. I wouldn't say, by the way, that I can find a single area where corruption increased during these 3.5 years. And I asked several people before this event, they also couldn't name such an area. There are areas where corruption is still on a high level. There are areas where corruption decreased a lot, like traffic police, for example. So, with institutional change, we have, for example, enterprises or public service, when we pay absolutely poor salary to people who operate millions of dollars. Of course they are corrupt. And even if they are put in jail and another person is running for an office, for a position where he or she will be paid $300 and then millions will be in charge, would I expect this person to do a really good governance? No. Without changing on institutional level, without having good salaries, normal salaries, proper salaries, I think these changes cannot be stable. We can in some time having like great people who just want to devote their time, they are wealthy themselves, but that's a rare example. If we really speak about good governments, that it means that on institutional level, developments first of all shall be done. So that's kind of priority that I think is for Ukraine, and that's something that I would encourage if you invest your time, efforts, your expertise to change Ukraine. I think this is the most important thing.
Derek, can I ask you to switch over to the civil society end of it, because there have been a number of incidents over the past few months that probably do not reflect very favorably on the government's attitude towards civil society, including the intrusion into the Patients of Ukraine office 2 days ago.
Yeah, so Patients of Ukraine is, this is NGO, they are our very close partners, and they have been investigated for terrorism financing. In fact, the organization helped to deprive pharmaceutical mafia from illicit proceeds which they got for years on the procurement of medications. We work with them. We worked with them since 2012. And they are also investigated in the embezzlement of donors' funds. So this is something that Ukrainian government, and specifically non-reformed institution and the post-Soviet monster which we inherited, prosecution, general office, this is what they do now. They attack activists jointly with the security service of Ukraine. So in respect to our organization, we are facing the same. We've been investigated since 2016. In 2016, Prosecutor General Office triggered a criminal case against us, alleging that we have stolen American taxpayers' money, which American embassy sent to reform Prosecutor General Office. And Prosecutor General Office never received these funds, and they were concerned where the funds are going, and they decided that the funds went to our bank accounts. So they fabricated the criminal case. They got access to all our financial documents. They probably wiretapped us. Probably they did some other undercover operations, and they then closed the case. And then we found all the documents which are our secret documents, which financial documents in the internet floating around. So they use that to manipulate with the data and to discredit us. So this intensified in April 2017 this year. The government, the parliament and the president signed the law which obliged anti-corruption activists to submit asset declarations as public officials do. And now anti-corruption activists are liable for false statements in the asset declarations and for not declaring assets. And the liability is criminal. So I can go in jail for 2 years not declaring or for false statements in the asset declaration. So the president, when signed the law, he told that I have to protect soldiers. And in fact, yes, in that law there were clauses about soldiers, but how the clauses about NGOs and activists appeared in the law about soldiers, it's a big question. It was done intentionally. President promised to correct that draft, but he never did that. And I don't believe he will do. Because it's very useful tool to use to discredit those people who are criticizing the authorities. If on the national level we are facing discreditation campaign, heavy discreditation campaign, and criminal investigations, on the regional level, activists are being beaten. There is physical threat, and sometimes threat to their life. And in August, September this year, 2 activists from Kharkiv Anticorruption Center were beaten by unknown people because these activists were revealing corruption of the local mayor, Mr. Kernes. The problem is that these attacks are not investigated properly, and the life of the human being in the region, the life of the activists in the region, is very cheap. It's very cheap to pay to titushkas, to some thugs, right, for local corrupt official or businessman to clean up the problem, and to pay to a local prosecutor to ensure that it will never be investigated. It's a very cheap investment. And as far as there is no reaction of prosecution on such kind of instances, it will intensify. And I will also say something about new institutions. Taras told that new institutions is a solution, but new institutions is not enough. I have an example of a new institution which failed. This is National Anticorruption Preventive Commission. This new institution has to give answer to the citizens. What is next? So what after such wealth was revealed in the asset declarations? This institution was created to investigate false statements in the asset declarations of top officials and to hold them to administrative liability, and to send results of the investigations to NABU, Anti-Corruption Bureau, to make sure that there will be criminal liability. But this institution failed to do their job. They verified probably 20 or so asset declarations within the year since declarations are available. And there are about, how many, 50 people already working there, even more, and 4 managers. So there is a person in this hall, in this room, one person, which did more than all these 50 people for a year. Dima, please stand up. Dima Chaplinsky, this modest guy, he did more than the National Anti-Corruption Preventive Commission in verification of asset declaration. So he developed the online tool and took all open data from asset declaration site and described IT solutions and tools for activists and civil society activists and journalists how to use this data. Thank you, Dima. Yeah. So you can reach him afterwards to learn how to use that. And the webpage declarations.com.ua has more than 30,000 users every day, including NACP, including the agency which had to develop the same tool. Yeah? And why the institution failed, why NACP failed and NABU didn't? New institutions. The issue is that it's not enough to have just a new institution. You have to ensure that good people are coming to head this new institution. And it's easy to say what has to be done, it's hard to say how to do that. And if, in the case of NABU, we had a selection process which encouraged really good candidates to apply and which ensured that the best candidates will win, in NACP, we didn't have such kind of good selection process. If in NABU, our team, Anti-Corruption Action Center, we were monitoring every single step of the selection commission. I was personally, jointly with Tata, my colleague here in hall, we were watching YouTube online broadcasting of the interviews with 100 people from early morning till night, sometimes during the weekends, to ensure that there is no attack on the competition. There were many attacks, but we spotted that, we immediately communicated that, and it prevented attempts to destroy the competition. But the most important thing, as a secret to success, in NABU selection, there was one foreigner. There was Italian prosecutor Giovanni Kessler sitting in the selection commission, not advising, but sitting there and taking the responsibility for the final outcome. And this factor, I believe, was the key towards the success of this competition, because it was very, they were afraid, presidential administration was afraid to manipulate with the selection commission very straightforwardly if there was the current EU official there sitting and actually observing all that. The same was in the selection of specialized anti-corruption prosecutor, which is also more or less successful story. Less successful than with NABU selection, but more or less successful. We had current American prosecutor Mary Butler, not advising, but sitting in the commission and taking the responsibility for the final outcome. And again, we are following every single step and hearing of the selection commission. Our head of the board, Vitaly Shabunin, who will be here next week, he was also sitting in the commission. So there were 2 people out of, I believe, 9 in the commission who were defending the results. And they protected the evil from winning the competition. In NACP, we didn't have something like that. So, and if we're speaking about challenges, time is a challenge. Time plays against the successful institution, against National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Because Bureau detains people, starts big investigations, but still no one is in jail. And people are irritated. People have no difference between NABU detaining people and Prosecutor General detaining people. Both are detaining and they all are leaving. And people don't understand that this is the court who makes up the final decision. And therefore, for us, it's the issue of vital importance to establish as soon as possible anti-corruption court. But not just the new institution, but the new institution with proper selection process of anti-corruption judges. And we want to embed the success story of NABU selection and SAPO selection into the selection process for the anti-corruption judges. We want that the majority of the selection commission, which will select judges, should be experts recommended by the foreign partners of Ukraine which invest into the anti-corruption. This could be both foreigners and non-foreigners, but this is the must-have prerequisite to the success of the anti-corruption court. Yeah, probably I will stop here at this point.
So you also kind of naturally started segueing into the future and kind of moments that are going to be crucial going forward. I mean, could you say a little bit, so what you alluded to, and I think that ends up happening quite often, is a degree of fatigue, right? That you see both from the general population and a certain degree of complacency that you see that, well, we can't change anything because the politicians are playing the same games as always. And so what you're feeling is on if you're taking the pulse of the population, you know, how tired are people of pushing for reforms? Where do you see the political will, and how civil society can continue to influence it? I know that you're also interested in leveraging internationals as well, including the IMF and the World Bank. But if you could start from the domestic players.
How tired we are? Actually, we are very tired. In Antec, we are very tired. But I personally, I feel less tired. I slept well in Washington. I have two small kids, so I feel more tired in Ukraine. And society, of course, is tired. Of course, there are high expectations. There is war. The dollar is increasing, and it means that there is big inflation, and people are getting poorer and poorer. Therefore, people need success stories. And I believe that the success story from the anti-corruption point of view, well, someone has to be punished. It's impossible. When I woke up today, I was watching a documentary, the investigative story about Judge Artur Yemelyanov. It's the judge who was appointed by Yanukovych and who was resolving key commercial cases in Kiev. He's was deputy head of the commercial court under Yanukovych time, and still is deputy head of the commercial court. So Schemes Radio for Liberty, they conducted investigation about the assets of Judge Yemelyanov across the globe. So the judge has a villa in Antalya. A judge has two networks of hotels in Vienna and Frankfurt. Judge is educating his two kids in the best schools, hotel schools, so I think that he will manage the hotels in Switzerland, and law school, I believe, in somewhere in Vienna. And the judge recently, just a few days ago, he celebrated a wedding of his son in the palace, historical luxurious palace in Vienna. And he is not shy about that. Of course, everything is registered on his wife. Of course, his wife is no more his wife. They divorced. Do you believe that they divorced? The judge simply divorced not to declare his assets. Now he is poor. He has only a moped, a Motorola or something like that. But the journalist spotted him driving luxurious car in downtown Vienna, where his actually wife and 3 kids are living. So, and after seeing this video and this investigation, what should average Ukrainian think and feel? Injustice. In order to restore people's trust to the government, in order to give hope to people that we are moving into the proper direction, we need to show that there is justice. And there is a way towards justice. People in Ukraine are very patient people and very hardworking. We are ready to work, we are ready to wait, but we do not tolerate when the senior officials are stealing. And on October 17, actually in a few days, on Tuesday, we are coming in front of the parliament. Taras will not come.
Unfortunately.
You have to do something in Yale, a protest. We are doing it in the regions. We are coming protesting in front of the parliament for anti-corruption court. There will be a big rally. So if anyone is from Ukraine hearing that, please come.
Taras, can I turn to you for a little bit of commentary from your perspective?
Absolutely. So looking towards future, we of course see elections in 2019, and we have first presidential elections in spring and then parliamentary elections in autumn. I think that's the sign of democracy that it's not foreseeable, the results are not clear. We absolutely don't know who will win, and that's part of democratical system, but that's probably the most positive frame how I can frame this. In reality, there is a big danger that the next president will be populist, and that those reforms that are done now might be reversed. And I think it would be much harder for civil society and donors to work with next government than with this one. It's also likely that we will remember these years as years of really big changes and big possibilities. We get used that we can lobby parliament and have a new law, and had 100 of that for the coalition for 3.5 years. Still important things are in parliament being adopted, like educational reform, like pension reform. This might be reversed. We don't know. 2 years before elections, even 1.5, of course means that those reforms that are not popular quite hardly be considered. So I think we are lucky with the pension reform to be adopted these days. It's not that much beneficial for people, though also obviously for those who will be retiring in future. A little bit more beneficial for those who already retired. And I think that was done for a reason, because elections soon, and retired people are a big portion of voters, and those voters who always come to elect, not as younger people I would want to say like us, but more like Daria, not that young anymore, not showing to elections, or at least showing only in very smaller proportion. It's also a global trend, it's not just Ukrainian trend. So with elections coming close, we have a big challenge now with reform of medical system. It's not Obamacare, but still very important thing. I think when people speak about corruption, in many cases, they actually mean money that they give to doctors. Because for most of population, that's the area where they personally face this. And Ukrainians perceive this as corruption. By the way, I was talking with my fellow from China. In China, they don't consider this as corruption. They consider this as culture to give some money to doctor. And probably when I ask about perception of corruption index, they don't qualify it as a corruption. In Ukraine, Ukrainians, they do, and it is a big problem. The system is very poor and it's falling apart. Hopefully it will be reformed. So with elections coming, as I mentioned, there are less chances to do not popular reform. But there are also, I think, bigger chances to push for those reforms that were promised for a long time, that were never been done, but only by concentrating all the efforts that civil society, international society, political opposition has. And this gathering near parliament, I believe, is very important, because it is about election reform. And election legislation is something that is of the crucial importance, because one of the biggest problems is the political system that is driven by oligarchs. The system is done in a way that oligarchs actually controlling political party, they give a lot of money before elections, and this money then given back to these oligarchs through television advertising, but in a way that actually oligarchs paid in reality nothing, but political party is needs to pay back everything that was given. So the huge dependent. It was important that law on public financing of political party was introduced. But I was told by politicians that this money that they receive, even though it's millions of dollars, for their budgets, that's like very small amounts. And political advertising on television is one of the biggest reasons, because they fundraise a lot to buy enormous amounts of advertising on television in order to influence minds of people. Like previous elections, party that won elections, they were not existing like 3 months before elections at all. How you can raise the knowledge about this party? Television advertising. That's the primary goal. And that's how parties are competing. And that's why we consider that limitation, very strong limitation on political advertising on television is needed. I know it's allowed in America and many people believe it is a problem. I also know it's banned in most of the Western European countries. We suggest that strong limitations are very much needed. And in general, actually, I would say that like 3 most crucial things that shall be priority for this year. Independent judges. That's what changes that are happening, but very slowly. And that's of crucial importance. Election system and political system that is less dependent from oligarchs. And there are several means that might be done, including advertising, but not limited. And punishment for anti-corruption, punishment for corrupt acts.
Not anti-corruption activists.
I didn't tell activists. Punishment for corrupt acts. That's also something that people were struggling after Orange Revolution. Never had anyone in jail after Orange Revolution. Never had in jail, or at least no feeling that someone was punished after revolution and dignity. This is the parameter where I don't see really big difference between these 2 revolutions. Though there are parameters where difference it is. And well-structured and developed civil society is one of the big differences between Orange Revolution and Revolution of Dignity.
I was wondering if I could go back to the question that you didn't, that I raised a little bit, but you didn't answer, and I know that it's something that's you're interested in terms of IMF leverage, international leverage on Ukraine as well, and what role the international community can play in supporting civil society's efforts and Ukraine's reform efforts as a whole.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. Actually, this is the answer to the question how, the most difficult question. We were successful in anti-corruption achievements only because what we were driving for, what we were requesting for, was also requested by the IMF, by the EU, by the World Bank, by the US government, by the US embassy, by the G7 embassies, by everyone. And that there was a synergy between all these donors, so they were coordinating and still are coordinating their requests and conditionalities to Ukrainian government. There was a synergy between them and between us, between donors and Western partners and between civil society. And there was a synergy between donors, between us, and pro-reform politicians and public servants in the government. We have such pro-reform politicians and public servants. They are just in the minority, and the pressure which is coming from us and international donors and partners is help for them, actually, to break this bureaucracy and to break the interests of oligarchs which are prevailing in the government and to introduce some positive steps forward. So this was the secret towards some sort of success. And we need still this pressure to prevent rollbacks, as they are already happening. We already managed to prevent many of them, including the dismissal of NABU director through the fake external audit, and in order to advocate for the last piece in our anti-corruption puzzle, the anti-corruption court. So, and we are happy that anti-corruption court is now one of the key requirements of the IMF towards Ukraine. So IMF supposed to send the mission in September to prepare the next tranche to Ukraine, but they didn't send it. Because under the IMF memorandum, Ukraine had to pass the law on the anti-corruption law in June 2017, a few months ago. But they were, manipulating, playing, saying that the court is not a solution. In America there is no anti-corruption court. And Melinda is laughing because she was in YES conference in September, and she witnessed that how President jungled with all that, and and Kerry replied, all courts in America are anti-corruption courts, and President told, yes, we will make all courts in Ukraine anti-corruption courts. And he told that anti-corruption court is probably only in Uganda and somewhere else, an African country, but not developed Ukraine. But you know what? A week ago, he changed his mind. A week ago, he went on the meeting with students in Chernihiv, and he, in his speech to the students, he issued a very important statement. He told that he always thought about creation of the anti-corruption court in Ukraine. He envisioned this court in the law on the judiciary, which was adopted in June 2016. And he believes Ukrainians can establish the anti-corruption court. And it's the vital importance to have anti-corruption court to deliver justice. And the reason why he changed his opinion was the pressure from us, from IMF, from the EU, from other institutions, from many hidden players, which at the end resulted in the very positive opinion of and recommendations of the Venice Commission. So the Venice Commission is the commission which assesses legislation and provides a recommendation to the governments what should be better way to legislate something. And 2 draft laws existing in the parliament on the anti-corruption court and anti-corruption chambers were sent in July by the government to the Venice Commission. And the commission prepared a report saying that, listen, your idea with chambers, sorry, but it's a bullshit. It's nothing. It will make things worse. But what you have to do is a separate court, and this draft law has to be introduced by the president to avoid unconstitutionality. And you know what? You have to focus in this law on how you select judges. And you have engaged foreign experts and players into the selection of judges. This is what Venice Commission told. And when even Venice Commission is telling that, the president could not joke anymore and play and manipulate anymore with why he can't do anti-corruption court. And now, actually the IMF is not deciding to send the mission until the law will pass the parliament. And we explained to IMF saying, listen, if they tell you that they can pass the law within the next month, don't trust them. They passed the law on the judiciary in 5 days. They passed the law on allowing non-lawyer to be a prosecutor general in 1 day. And they voted immediately for him in the same day, and it's Prosecutor General Lutsenko. So, and IMF is listening to us. And their success story, the success story of IMF, was that they came in April 2014, first not to the government, but to us, to our office, to Office of Taras organization, and they talked to civil society. And they asked what is reasonable to ask Ukrainian government in terms of anti-corruption conditionalities. And we brainstormed together what is possible. And we already, in our organization, we knew that it's easier to set up something from scratch, like NABU, rather than reform something which is unreformable as Prosecutor General Office. And they listened to us, they trusted us, and they still trust us. And we are working very closely, hand by hand with them. And this is actually helps to deliver results. And for IMF, Ukraine is a country where they are testing how they, as a financial institution, can have impact in anti-corruption. Because they have not only Ukraine, which is a corrupt client, they have many other countries which are corrupt clients and corrupt governments. So, and it's for that reason, it's also our obligation in Ukraine to succeed in anti-corruption fight. Because that's, we can have global impact, and the institutions headquartered here in Washington will also revolutionize how they operate in some countries with similar conditionalities as in Ukraine.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question, then open it up to the audience, but I'm going to come back to you and come back to domestic issues. And in a little bit, it plays off of what Daria was saying. So you're clearly an or civil society, say, or organized, formalized civil society in Kiev as an interlocutor for a number of international players. It begs the question how much credence you have domestically. If you do travel around the Ukrainian regions, they tend to think of RPR particularly as an elite club in Kiev that really doesn't have much to do and is not necessarily representative of civil society on a broader level. I understand that that's something that you've been thinking of as well, but how do you see that going forward, and what do you think that some of the impact's going to be?
Thank you for your question. Ukrainian NGOs that were developed mostly with donor support, and thank you for donor support for a long time. Most of organizations, they're think tanks. They're small organizations with small but very strong units who stay there for years, who are trained abroad, and who learn what to do. But it's quite few organizations that are actually membership organizations that have good membership on the baseline, and that have this connection with the baseline. So when you're speaking about connection, it's like two things that are important. One thing is the quality of decisions that are made, so that these decisions are made not just by the unique group of experts, but actually by more broader community. And in this regards, sometimes it's not only about activists, but just popular support. Not all the reforms are actually popularly supported. And that the land reform that RPR is promoting is not popularly supported at all. Though some are supported. So this may still work or may not. Like expert in Kiev can suggest reform by consultation that they would be successful. But the second issue that we are missing, and that's I think much bigger important, is connection. When people feel disconnected, they don't trust. They imagine something worse than that it is. They don't feel that they were asked about their opinion. That works in every community, relations, everywhere. So this connection is something that we are missing with citizens. And one of my ideas that we already started putting our strategy, more regional work, hire regional coordinator, going to regions and helping them to establish local coalitions to reform Kharkiv, to reform Rivne, to reform Lviv, Odessa, and other cities. So that's one thing. And another thing that's coming to my mind more and more, that RPR became effective as more central-based coalition to lobby central government. And probably different initiative needed, or maybe the same or different restructured, needed to be more focused on a lower level, on local government that now having more competence after decentralization, having more money, having more decisions to be made, and first of all, focusing not on advocacy on certain issues, but focusing on empowerment of people, of citizens, to take responsibility, to unite in small units, to unite in bigger coalitions, to encourage them to take more responsibility for their lives, for the lives of their community. And when a lot of Ukrainians were thinking about, from political point of view, creating very good political party in contrast to very bad that we have, and it's failing from time to time when they're trying to do. I think there is much bigger possibilities for success to have more civic movement that would be about political changes as well, but it would be focusing on local initiatives, on empowerment of people, on bringing changes in different cities, and on building really big network, global network around Ukraine to do things together. So that's what I believe, and I still believe in Ukraine. I always believe in Ukraine, and I believe that there are good chances to succeed with various initiatives that we are doing, that Daria is doing, that Passions of Ukraine are doing, even though they are under big pressure now. I believe that the quality of Ukrainian citizens, the level of their personal development is really very high. And when we add joint actions, coalitions, bringing people together, that's really what multiply the effect of the personal energy that we already have.
So, thank you. And if we can open the floor to questions, we'll probably take about 3 and then at once and then move on. So, Alex, Adrian, and the lady in the back for gender balance.
Hi, thank you. First, thank you very much for your comments, and thank you for your work. As 2 real protagonists of democracy in Ukraine, it's really appreciated. My question is for Taras, and this may be building off of what you just talked about. I count myself among the many that are admirers of RPR. But among those that are admirers of RPR, some of us are concerned that it was a product of unique circumstances, that there was this window, post-revolutionary window, where RPR was able to come together and have this great influence. And we'd like to see that in other countries, but we see this, as was mentioned, as a gold standard. What are you doing now organizationally or politically to sustain RPR's current influence, salience, and its role? Because my concern, or the concern of many, would be that as we move further and further away from the events of Maidan, that it may become harder and harder to hold this group together and to maintain the importance and salience that you have so far.
Sorry, can I ask everybody to introduce themselves
Oh,
as well?
sorry. Alex Sokolovsky, USAID.
Hi there, I'm Adrian Karmazin with U.S. Ukraine Foundation, and my question is, do you feel that there are any genuine reformist parties in the parliament right now that do tend to vote more, or be more supportive of your efforts in battling corruption, or is it a matter of each party having some reformers? And then I think Taras somewhat addressed this, but maybe you can dive a little deeper into it. Still, do you see that that there is hope for creating a party that is going to be more genuinely reformist in the next election, or again, is it more going to be every party having reformers would be better, perhaps?
This third one? One more?
Yeah, and the last person in the back, I guess.
Alicia Gardner. So we all know the names Mustafa Naim, Yegor Sobolev, Tatiana Chornovil. They're the journalists, Ukrainian journalists, very active in civil society movement, turned politicians. So I wonder, what's your opinion on them actually being decision makers, policy makers? Do you think they are instrumental in making changes in the government, or do you think it would have been better if they stayed where they were because they were good and effective? And the second part of the question that I actually asked Taras in 2008, but I will ask again. Last time he said no, but we'll see what he says now. So I wonder if you have aspirations on becoming public servants, and yes or no, and why?
I think the first question was to Taras.
Okay, I'll try to answer briefly, though actually questions are very, very, very deep and quite big. I several times told that if you want to repeat creating of such a coalition, you probably need to start with revolution. That was really energy of revolution that brought everyone together. That was another second challenge to maintain, and you are right. But I'm also studying now about coalition building, and one of the classes that I'm taking at Yale University, auditing at Yale University, is evolution of cooperation. And it's a mixture of psychology and game theory about like strategies when people cooperate, when they defeat, what are incentives, and like from science perspective also to add. I was thinking about RPR as a coalition from game theory perspective when I was in Ukraine. I got a book on game theory accidentally, and it was helpful because that's about balance, that's about equilibrium. Because coalition, that's equilibrium. When wishes to cooperate is prevailing, and when benefits for everyone are bigger if they cooperate. So that's, I think, also very interesting. But from the point, another thing, from the point of maintenance, I believe that crucial point was to establish good governments and system inside the coalition. Because at the beginning it was just group of great people who were really wishing to do very good things and suggesting everyone to join. But at certain moment, and actually the moment was maybe like half a year already after the establishment, we had to think about governments. And governments is how decisions are made. They couldn't be made just by General Assembly every week. We had to think about who we are, what the baseline, electing board, having General Assembly, having certain rules. And these rules would be considered as just by members of the coalition. With political party, I think this niche is like tried to be fulfilled by several politicians, including Saakashvili, who came back to Ukraine and claimed that his movement of new forces will be like the platform for everyone new to be united. We see someone old also near him when he's talking about that, so we don't know for sure whether it will be about new or old, whether it will be stable, sustainable through this year, 2 years before elections or not. That's not predictable. It's always very hard to bring, much more harder to make political alliance that like civil society alliance. I think there are a lot of challenges, and from current parties that support reforms that then more like reflect the ideas of Maidan, I think Samopomich is on better position than others. And also about like truly against corruption, I think it's nearly not possible that governmental party, especially in Ukrainian situation, would be truly against corruption, while opposition party might be, especially if it's new opposition party that didn't have history of being in governments, so they can be more like easy about true creation of anti-corruption bodies. And I think Yegor Sobolev is doing quite a good job, and I think that's great that he became a politician, not stayed in a journalist. It's quite a tradition that journalists are becoming politicians, also because they are well-recognized people in society. And with political system that we have closed party lists, political parties want someone prominent to be on the top to show to the society, and then just to pay seats to have someone pay $5 million to be on the next to, but not really visible. So that's why also we consider that the election system should be changed. So generally, I think it's rather positive that journalists and civic activists became politicians. It's not that good that they went with different parties, not creating one. And like momentum after Maidan was a good momentum to do it. That was lost due to many factors. And the final thing about public servants, I don't remember that conversation truly, but I made at least 2 attempts to be a public servant. I used to be actually assistant to the member of parliament, formerly public servant, when I was just finishing my law degree. I was running for the position of member of TV and radio regulatory authority, TV and Radio Council of Ukraine. That was with like votes in parliament, not successfully. I'm not excluding that I'll run for office or I may take a position in government For me, the most important thing, I thinking about changes in Ukraine. For me, most important, what is more influential place in real, like with more possibilities to make these changes. I'm happy I stayed with RPR for these three and a half years. I'm happier than others. Yeah, they became politicians. But with what we were doing in civil society, I think it was, I probably would be less effective as one of the members of parliament. And I think what RPR is doing is probably bigger than one of the faction of parliament already created. Though at the same time, it cannot remain for forever. As I said, we really need to build institution, governmental institution. Civil society cannot forever substitute, especially with foreign donors' money, what government is entitled to do, what ministry should be doing. And that's I believe, is something quite important.
Okay, I will address the same questions on RPR. Ukrainian civil society is not only RPR. It's important to understand. It's much more than RPR. And here I have different opinion about than Taras. I think that we have to give chance to new coalitions, and there might emerge new coalitions. If there are concerns about the one and the time from the one of the time of the one coalition is ending, probably the alternative has to emerge, or probably there could emerge more coalitions, and the more the bigger, and the better. So my point is we don't have to stick only to RPR, and this is how our organization works. We are members of RPR, but our world is much bigger than this coalition. About the political party, whether there is a chance for a new alternative emerge, actually there is work going on to develop a new alternative. And I think that it's the biggest challenge for Ukrainian nation to work together, to agree on something, and actually it's a challenge to work together in the politics. Because politics is also a sort of, you have to learn how to do it. It doesn't come from nothing. It's a very specific thing. You can do in politics something that you can't do as a journalist, and vice versa. And it turns to the next question about journalists turning into the politicians. I will compare Yegor Sobolev and Leshchenko. So Sobolev turned into the politician, Leshchenko didn't. So for me, Sergei, I respect him very much. We work together, but he's a journalist in the parliament, still a journalist in the parliament. So about the new political party, we have good chances that the new alternative will emerge. And I don't think that it's 90% chance that the populist will win the elections, that Yulia Tymoshenko will be the president. Disaster. I think that we have a good chance to have Ukrainian Macron. And if you look into the success of Macron in France, he emerged in 1 year. In 1 year until the elections, no one knew who's Macron. And he built his party already when he was a president, right? So institutionally. So things are changing quick in Ukraine. So there is a chance for a good alternative to emerge. And there is a chance that all pro-reformist parties will kind of run together for the elections. But, there is one but, and it goes to what Taras told about media and the importance of the role of TV and TV advertisement. And we need your help here in Washington to do something with that. Because most of the TV channels in Ukraine, big TV channels, they are owned and controlled by the oligarchs. Kolomoisky, Pinchuk, Akhmetov, and Mr. Poroshenko. So, and they have influence over these TV channels. Akhmetov, for example, he has Terka Ukraina, one of the largest TV channel, prepared recently 4 documentaries, 4 or 3, on the prime time with the name Following the Ground Eaters. And it is about Leshchenko, Mustafa Naim, Zalishchuk, Sobolev, and Vitaly Shabunin, and Andriy Gerus. So about those who are both in power and not in power, and who are criticizing authorities and are using facts to criticize the authorities, and who have trust of the citizens. So Akhmetov is allowing to produce this Following the Grand Eaters documentary in order to trigger distrust and disgust to these good people from the citizens of Ukraine. And I already mentioned it to Alex, the €4 sandwich effect. It illustrates a lot how manipulative is this documentary and how actually the same technique is used in other TV channels, and it is allowed by oligarchs. So the documentary screened Sergei Leshchenko, who complained in Facebook that the Kolomoisky Airlines, MAU, are so bad, their sandwiches are so bad, and they cost €4. And they depicted it in the documentary as the member of the parliament is eating a sandwich for €4. A sandwich for €4. And what's the problem with the sandwich? Because Ukrainians don't eat sandwiches for €4. Sandwich for €4 is sandwich for 120 hryvnias. For 120 hryvnias, you can have 10 sandwiches. Ukrainian citizens, they don't know what are billions, what are millions, what are hundred thousands of dollars. They don't know how much does it cost to have a wedding in the palace in Vienna. And even if find out that it costs $20,000, then usually don't know what is $20,000 because then don't spend it every day, unlike Arturo Emiliano. So for them, €4 is a problem, not 4 million. And in such kind of manipulations, owners of the TVs are coordinating the opinions of majority of the population. So something has to be done about the owners of this media. Kolomoisky, Akhmetov, Pinchuk, Poroshenko. Some of them are better, some of them are worse, but I believe that more or less all of them, including the new owner, Yatsenyuk, we have to congratulate him. He has Espresso TV. He also is a media holder. So the US government has to talk to them, because most of them, they have assets here. They have assets on the West, in Switzerland. Most of them, they use dollar accounts, which are touching American jurisdiction, which means that United States has enormous leverage which could be imposed on these guys. So I think that Washington has to talk to oligarchs in the language of power, saying, if you will continue using manipulative techniques, jinsa, it is so-called ad, which is not paid. It is paid, but it is not reflected in media that it's paid, and Taras knows better. So if they will continue doing that, there should be a reaction. And the reaction, asset freezes, visa bans, all that stuff. So this is the way how you could help here and how Washington could help us to allow alternative, if it will emerge, to win the elections. Because if they will not have access to the TV, but only this ever reforming, never reforming actually, but just changing the brands, Party of Regions, Nasha Ukraina, turning into something Poroshenko and mixing and then splitting, it will be there forever. So that's the thing which we have to focus on. Not only building alternative and keeping people together, but allowing them to have the similar access to resources, media resources. Thank you.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and the lady in the front and Mr. Marshall.
Thank you so much. So illuminating. My name is Mindy Reiser. I'm vice president of an NGO called Global Peace Services. You talked earlier about the general unhappiness of people in Ukraine in these national surveys, international surveys. And I'm going to shift the question a little bit. I'm going to ask about the role of young entrepreneurs in Ukraine. Often people who start new businesses come with hope and expectation. Is this a force that can be tapped to support what you're doing? Is this a kind of world that will attract young people and make them feel that their future is in the Ukraine despite all its problems? So please tie some economic possibilities, young people, and transformation.
Some of us have been a little bit detached from what's been happening in Ukraine recently, but I've served a number of missions with OSCE in past years, and there were references being made to reforms that have been enacted, for example, in pensions, education, and let's see, I can't quite recall the other one, but could you cite some examples of the nature of some of those reforms and how they've been going? Thank you.
Last question. In front here.
I was wondering if you can talk about the role, if any, of people, Ukrainians displaced from the East, in your organizations.
So first of all, thank you for suggestion about working with private entrepreneurs. I really think that's young people who are thinking about developing some ideas. They are big force, and social entrepreneurship is also very important. I have a very good fellow from Argentina on my program at Yale University, and he actually created a network of social entrepreneurs in the northern Argentinian part, and we were sharing experience. He was telling how progressive and how good it was. So I think that that's something that we can really use for Ukraine. As to reforms, I don't think we have time to go into lots of details, but just one example with pension reform. It was a suggestion of international donors that pension age should be raised because it's like very low, 60 years. It was established 1937 in Soviet Union, and was changed for women from 55 to 60, but remaining the same for men. And Ukraine did not accept that position. Ukraine did not agree to raise pension age, but done it in a different way, in a way that linking your pension to how many years you worked and paid your fees to the pension system. And if you was doing that for many years, you can still have pension at 60, otherwise 63, otherwise 65, so that at least half of population will be in fact working more. But those who paid the pension system always, like my mom who spent like more than 40 years as a school teacher, she'll be in the same conditions. And for me, for example, this is a good example when both international pressure but Ukrainian expertise with developing what better fit in this system, what would not undermine completely the trust to government, because the raise of the pension age is is perceived very negatively, and it's everyone like hates and think it's very bad thing to do for the country, like Poland, that actually later like reversed the increase of pension age that was done by the previous government. And what was the last one? With IDPs. My head of accounting is from Mariupol. My head of education is from Donetsk. My event manager is from Mariupol. And that's like the head of education. She was in our summer school like 10 years ago, and she's professor from Donetsk University. And I was telling to her when the conflict started, move to Kiev, we'll give you a job. She was there like for a year during all the most difficult time, but then finally decided to move end of 2014. So that's our small part of support and connections with IDPs.
On entrepreneurs and young entrepreneurs, honestly, we don't work with entrepreneurs, and I wish we worked more in business with business in generally, because I think that business suffers the most and feels the most the pressure from law enforcement agencies, and specifically such an agency as Security Service of Ukraine. And while previously Taras told that there are no sectors in which corruption is bigger than under the Yanukovych, so I think that in Security Service it's probably an exemption, or at least if not an exemption, corruption first dropped there, and then it is returning, and returning on the significant level. So the Security Service of Ukraine, they have two departments, department on economic crimes and department on corruption crimes, and they do undercover operations and investigations. But in fact, what they do, they intimidate businesses. So they collect information about entrepreneurs and businesses which are profitable, which don't have the krysha cover from politicians on the top, and they go and raid them. And how they do that? They put them into the list of terrorists, financing organizations, and they find the way how to make the link between terrorism and these businesses. And then they seize their assets, and they come and, well, before seizing, they come and tell, oh, we are about to seize your assets. Why wouldn't you give 10%, 15% or something of your profit to somewhere which is controllable by us? And then if a businessman doesn't want, then they seize it. And then the business has problems. But our partners, investigative journalists, they say that business has this problem, but business is not ready to talk, because they are afraid to lose probably everything. I wish Ukrainian business, which is attacked, could talk more about that issues. And also I wish that Security Service of Ukraine would be reformed immediately according to the NATO standards, because the intelligence unit shouldn't do investigations of economic crimes and corruption. It shouldn't do investigations at all except terrorism and other crimes which are against territorial sovereignty of Ukraine. And actually, when the United States and the government of the United States is helping Ukraine to strengthen defense and security with financial assistance, with trainings, and with other sort of assistance, the government of Ukraine should consider also putting the conditionality on the security service to reform, to deprive it from these two functions. And it will automatically strengthen another part of institution, which is good. We hear actually that there are really good officers with dignity who are risking their lives on the East, on the war, and who are really protecting Ukraine and Ukrainian independence and Ukrainian people. But this part of the SBU is not a priority for the leadership of Ukraine. Their priority is Demchina, the head of the deputy head who is covering this economic and corruption departments. And the guy received the honor, a reward from the president, what an irony, on the Independence Day of Ukraine. So the president gives a blessing to such kind of misconducts. And the president sends a powerful message to entire SBU and to all other law enforcement agencies that, listen guys, we are tolerating corruption. We are awarding corruption. And the president is sending a powerful message to actually good people in law enforcement agencies, which we have, telling, if you want to be successful and still be and act fair and honest, you will not be successful. You will not be a manager of this agency. You will not be promoted. So keep your place, do some sort of minor job, and but we will not promote you. This is what a message sends president in such kind of word. So coming back to the internal displaced persons, we don't work on this issue. We have some instances of cooperating with the displaced person. Actually, where is Dima? He probably left. The IT guru guy. Here's here. He's internally displaced person. Are you? Yeah. So he came to Kiev from Lugansk. So he is sitting there in Lugansk, and he brought almost all his family, and he started to do social responsible business. He started White Collar 100 and all that documents which were found in Mezhigirya and Kurchenko documents about black accounting of Yanukovych and Kurchenko. So he was trying to help put it all together, to analyze that, and then Dima jointly with Denis Bigus and tens of volunteers started to work on the webpage declarations.com.ua, about which I told you already. So they were transforming paper-based declarations of Ukrainian officials into the, how is it called, readable format, machine-readable format. This is the right thing. So this is an example how actually internally displaced person can do miracles.
Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you very much to Taras and Daria for joining us today, and your maintained interest in both our activities and in Ukraine. So thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Delighted to see you again.
It's been a while.
Yes, it has.
How have you been?
So good for a while. I had to have people
Вони робили нову хвилю під Саакашвілі, а Саакашвілі сказав, що мені не треба. Зараз нової хвилі, ні туди, ні сюди. Чувак в цілому, як на мене, дуже позитивний персонаж, але серед тих, хто не дуже є кооперативним. Хто більше бачить себе, свій особистий рейтинг, те ж саме Гриценко.
Абсолютно, він дуже впливає свій президентський.
Чумак чи Гриценко?
Гриценко. Чумак хоче власне амбіції. Побачимо, що з того станеться, але він бодай не має ж дуже багато позитивних людей. Чи є?
Ні, немає, але якось, чесно кажучи, я навіть ніколи в житті не думав, що Чумак хоче бути президентом, якось і не думаю, що люди навколо про це думали.
Ага, так, але...
This is exactly the way the mafia operates in Italy.
Може це.
Ти знаєш, що Аліна Федорченко жила в мене в сім'ї. Так.
А це зараз?
Так, зараз вона була класна.
Ти вже про неї казав з Донецька.
Ти ще будеш до кінця грудня?
В Америці я до середини грудня, а тут зараз до вихідних і наступний четвер знову приїжджаю на 3 дні. У нас вся наша єльська програма приїжджає сюди на зустріч.
Що до кінця року зорганізуємо ще якийсь форум.
Окей, добре. Так. Дякую. А що ти думаєш про політичні перспективи партії і все інше?
Я не знаю, мені було цікаво, я коли я в Україні, я так говорив, що це для мене було найцікавіший варіант. Можливо, Порошенко Садовий, бо все ж таки це було більш такі, знаєш, реформаторське крило, але люди кажуть, Садовий, знаєш. Але я не знаю, це вам вирішує. Це ваша проблема. I don't know.
Okay. Yes.
And I'm a fellow at the United States Institute of Peace. And I've been...
That's my card.
Great. So you're here and nearby, which is great. Please let us know if you're coming back to Washington.
Okay.
I've done all of my work in the past 7 years has focused on how citizens are organized. We really need, I mean, citizens are facing problems with healthcare and corruption, and we need to like focus on local level and how to mobilize citizens. This is like all my work, and I've been working, documenting what groups are doing all over the world. I don't work with them. I document what they do. I put them in touch with each other so that they can learn from each other and be in contact and things like that. And I'd be happy to just like.
Would you suggest any readings, any books or good articles that describe that?
I can send you links. I mean, I've
Yeah.
published like
please.
like a lot of things on this, and like most recently for the World Bank, and there was a case from Serbia all about healthcare corruption and bribery on the part of doctors, and fascinating. I mean, just like there's so much. So I'm happy to be in touch with you since you're in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's not so difficult to be in touch. How long will you be here?
Until
In
December
the
11th.
U.S. till December. Okay. Do you have? So this is your card.
Yeah.
So then we can be in touch. So I'll be in touch with you. And
Thank
all the
you.
best.
Thank you.
My name is Fortuna, and I work for IFES and I work in elections.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned briefly
Of course, I know
about
IFES.
Yes, of course.
They
you know.
operate in Ukraine. They have good office and good experts.
Yeah, and so many, Peter Urban was recently here. And so if you will be in town, like maybe not this time, but maybe some other time, longer time, so we can meet, have lunch, and discuss your further ideas. Because I think that's question it's a like long discussion what needs to be done, and I know about the election system, but maybe something else, and so that's something like just I have your email, and so let's be in touch. And so I am here, and so always happy to talk. I will travel, so my assistant now will be in Ukraine for elections because we're training or observing, but I will stay here. I was in summer, and I'm also from Georgia, so I can
obviously.
share. Yes, I can share experience from Georgia because I was working at USAID and was involved in all this reform process and everything, and so that's also I'm in DG sector for a long time, and I'm also happy to share Georgia experience as